Welcome to the HR Empowerment Podcast, where we will uncover strategies and new insights from HR professionals who discuss up-to-date regulations, best practices, and the most pressing topics like diversity and equity, leadership, dealing with difficult situations, and much more that affect your bottom line and business. Thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. I am here today with a very special guest, Patty Gander. Hi, Patty.
Hey, how you doing, Wendy?
Fantastic. I am so excited for our topic today. Folks, we're going to be talking about, over the next 5 sessions, we're going to be talking about overcoming skills gaps in the manufacturing industry. And I know many of our listeners are in that industry. Millions of manufacturing jobs will go unfilled due to skill gaps. And this affects pretty much everybody, right?
Yep.
Everything we buy, hopefully, you're buying American, but even if you're not buying fully American, we do trade parts and pieces with other countries. And so we all rely on manufacturing more now than ever. Why, what I really want to get into the heart of this is, why do we have this employee gap, which is everybody, not just the manufacturing world, but then why do we also have the skills shortage specifically in the manufacturing world? So any insight that you have whatsoever, Patty, and then of course, I want you to tell us a little bit about who you are and why you are qualified, why you are the expert at discussing this very topic.
Sure. So I may not sound it, but I have about 40 years of manufacturing experience. I tell everybody I started when I was 5, but the reality is it was later. And I've worked in a variety of different industries in manufacturing, from electronics, commercial, through a bunch of defense contractors in quality and in production area. And then more recently, I moved over to do consulting and training, again, primarily in the manufacturing industry. So I've spent a lot of time in manufacturing, either working in it or consulting for it. So I have a pretty good finger on the pulse of manufacturing. And for the last few years, I was part of the Sterling Business Manufacturing Excellence Award, where I actually went in and assessed hundreds of manufacturing companies across the state of Florida. So
Wow.
got a little peek behind the curtain of a lot of companies that I didn't work for, but was able to see the things that were going on in their organization and where their gaps were from a process standpoint, but also from an employee standpoint as well.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have worked together with clients in the manufacturing industry, and it blows my mind how far behind we are, in the U.S. With training and with development, with skills. And then, I know personally, I grew up in a manufacturing world. I grew up where everybody in my family was, and many still are, in the manufacturing industry. And turns out, I was like, I'm going to college. I'm going to get away from manufacturing. And not that I regret it, because, I do love what I do, but whoa, manufacturing is where it's at. And you don't need $100,000 college degree to do that. Would it be helpful to have, some education? Absolutely. But what we're seeing, and I know you're seeing this too, is the companies are investing in their employees in order to get to them to stay with them and to learn and grow and help keep training the next set of individuals. So give me some, ideas of why do you think there is an employee shortage and then the skill gap shortage in the manufacturing industry in the United States?
Sure. So this started pre-pandemic. A lot of people think, the pandemic caused it, but we started seeing this pre-pandemic a few years before the pandemic hit. As we started to see, the economy really kind of taking off and more demand for manufactured goods. So we were seeing organizations having to ramp up capacity in order to be able to provide the materials that people were buying from. And so part of that increasing requirements of capacity, there just wasn't enough people to fill positions, whether they had the skill or not. So companies had to start moving over towards technology in order to be able to produce the goods that they needed to produce. And so now you're introducing technology into an organization where you have people that have been working there that haven't used technology. So your current employee base has a skills gap to start with. And then you go and you start looking for employees outside for those skills. And we just don't educate people to move towards the manufacturing industry that we'll get into a little bit later in one of the other sections of this. But we just didn't introduce that level of training because we just offshored a lot of things. And then so the pandemic hits. And one of the things that the pandemic did was it caused it caused Americans particularly. We started looking at, all of the goods that were produced that weren't produced in the United States. And it showed us the vulnerability that we had. When you think about, people say, the electronics industry, for one, where you couldn't get components because they were all built in China, Japan, Taiwan, places like that. So it showed that we had this significant risk because a lot of the things that we needed to produce, we didn't produce here. So then we had this massive onshoring where all of a sudden we're trying to bring all the manufacturing back to the United States when we were already at our limits of capacity to begin with, and we were already at our limits in staffing and for people that had the skills in order to do the staffing. And then we exacerbated it by trying to bring all of this stuff back on shore and grow these capacities where we hadn't pre-planned for the capabilities that we needed. So we didn't have the internal staff that had the capability. We weren't able to hire people that had the capability. And in the state of Florida, 90% of the manufacturing companies are 50 employees or less, and worldwide, and in the United States, it's 80%. So you look at now the size of the manufacturing companies come into it as well, and they are good at manufacturing, but they're not necessarily good at training because they're small. They don't know what to do.
Right.
So you've introduced technology, you've introduced increased capacities, you've increased the need for additional capability, but you don't have the internal infrastructure in order to train for that capability. So it was kind of like the perfect storm.
Yeah, not so perfect, right?
Yeah. They say that the pandemic forced the manufacturing industry from a technology standpoint to basically jump about 5 years into the future of what they need for technology, just because of all of the onshoring and that need for that quick buildup of capacity that we just didn't have.
Wow, thanks for explaining it that way. I never really looked at it that way. I was looking at it more of we have less people going into manufacturing, which is also accurate as well, which we'll talk about in series 2 of this session shortly. But yeah, that's definitely an amazing way to look at it. In fact, I was in my car this weekend and I have a paper mask in there, and it was just a leftover one sitting there. And I kind of chuckled because I'm hanging on to it, right? Mm-hmm. Even though they're available now, remember when we couldn't find masks, so we're using everything and anything at home and trying to use them as masks and creating masks out of handkerchiefs and whatever it might be. So I'm still in the stage of, somebody gave me a mask, let me hang on to it, even though they're finally available everywhere. So I was kind of chuckling at myself about that. Wow, we've come a long way in the past couple of years, but we have so much more to go.
Oh, yeah.
With that said, folks, we will be right back to continue this conversation. I do want to talk about, avoidance of blue collar manufacturing jobs, and then the millions of jobs that can go unfilled in the United States in the manufacturing industry. So tune in soon and we will be right back.
Thank you for joining the HR Empowerment Podcast, brought to you by Aurora Training Advantage. We hope you've gained new insight and strategies to navigate the HR profession. We look forward to you joining us again on the HR Empowerment Podcast.